October does not follow September. At least it didn't for 61 years inside one of the largest corporations on Earth. If you look at the pocket planners issued to employees of the Eastman Kodak Company, you will find a 13th month. It was called Sol, and it sat exactly between June and July. It never appeared on any official government calendar. For over 6 decades, tens of thousands of people lived their professional lives inside a month that did not legally exist. And the reason they created it reveals something deeply disturbing. The calendar you use every day, the one you base your entire life around, might be fundamentally broken. I found one of these pocket planners by accident. I was investigating another destroyed document. But when you study how bureaucracies erase inconvenient facts, you start to notice a pattern. Institutions don't just record reality, they shape it. They decide what exists and what does not. Someone once decided that 13 was a bad number, and that single decision changed how you perceive every day of your life. Before we go further, we need to talk about the calendar we already use. Pope Gregory XIII introduced the Gregorian calendar in 1582. The old Roman calendar was drifting, pushing the spring equinox out of alignment. The Gregorian adjustment fixed the astronomy by skipping leap years over long periods. It works. It keeps the seasons locked in place. I don't dispute that. And when people hear the number 13, they usually dive straight into conspiracy theories. They immediately blame the Knights Templar. They talk about the Last Supper, occult rituals, and the curse of Friday the 13th. I spent days looking into those claims. They collapse completely. Historical records show the modern fear of 13, triskaidekaphobia, was largely hyped by 19th century social clubs and novelists. It is a manufactured superstition. The reality doesn't need a secret society. The reality is about something much colder than that. Here is what doesn't fit. Look at the names of the months you memorized as a child. September literally translates to 7, but it is the 9th month. October means 8, but it is the 10th month. November is 9. December is 10. Every single one of these names is fundamentally wrong. You use them every day, and they are off by exactly 2 months. Those names belong to a calendar that no longer exists. Someone added months to the beginning of the year, pushed everything forward, and left the labels behind, like scars on a timeline. We are living inside an edit. There are 13 full moons in a solar year. The math has always been there. Multiply exactly 28 days by 13 cycles, and you get 364 days. You are exactly 1 day short of a solar year. Ancient cultures handled that single remaining day with a festival, a day outside of time, a reset before the new cycle began. But instead, we use a system where months randomly contort between 28, 30, and 31 days. You have to memorize a nursery rhyme just to remember how long November is. 30 days hath September, April, June, and November. A system designed for human use would not require a poem to decode. Any child can understand 13 times 28. And our system massively complicates everything. You earn the exact same monthly paycheck whether the month has 28 days or 31. That's a 10% swing in your daily rate of pay, and it routinely favors the institution paying you. It is mathematically irregular.
And this is where the story stops being theoretical. Because in the 20th century, one company decided to test a completely different calendar. In 1902, a British accountant named Moses Cotsworth realized the absurdity of our current system. He managed finances for railway companies, trying to track millions of tons of freight across months of different lengths. A business doing the exact same daily volume would show drastically lower revenue in May than in April, simply because the weekends fell differently. It made financial planning almost impossible. Cotsworth proposed a fixed 13-month calendar. Every month would be exactly 28 days, every date falling on the exact same weekday forever. The first of the month is always a Sunday, the 7th is always a Saturday, the 13th is always a Friday, every single month. Cotsworth did not just write a pamphlet, he built an international movement, and he did something that almost no one knows about today. He took this proposal to the most powerful businessmen in America. He went to George Eastman, the billionaire founder of Kodak. George Eastman despised inefficiency. When Cotsworth presented him with the international fixed calendar, Eastman saw the exact solution to a problem he had struggled with for decades. He didn't just endorse it, he implemented it. In 1928, Eastman adopted the 13-month calendar for Kodak's entire global operation. Tens of thousands of employees, factories across multiple continents. At the Kodak headquarters, they printed specialized calendars. They reprogrammed their accounting machines. They created the 13th month called Sol and slipped it seamlessly between June and July. Every financial period was suddenly equal. Every comparison clean. In his internal correspondence, George Eastman argued that the Gregorian calendar obscured the truth of business and life. The man who revolutionized human memory through photography wanted to revolutionize human time. For 61 years, internal Kodak operations tracked time differently than the rest of the world, and it created an incredible cognitive dissonance for the people living inside it. Imagine being a factory worker in Rochester in 1955. Inside the factory walls, you operated in Sol. Your production quotas were measured in Sol. Your vacations were scheduled during the second week of Sol. But the moment you stepped out of the factory gates, Sol ceased to exist. You had to pay your rent in July. You had to send your kids to school in September. You lived your entire professional life in a time zone that legally did not apply to your family or your city. You had to constantly translate your schedule back into Gregorian time just to talk to your neighbors. You were carrying a pocket planner for a phantom month. But the system worked. Kodak proved it worked on a massive multinational scale. They demonstrated that time could be reorganized to serve pure logic. And for a brief moment in the 1920s, it looked like the entire planet might abandon the calendar you use today. The movement went global. The International Fixed Calendar League opened its headquarters in London. By 1928, the League of Nations, the predecessor to the United Nations, convened a special committee of inquiry into the reform of the calendar. The League of Nations gathered experts from around the world. They reviewed 130 different calendar proposals, and they chose the 13-month calendar unconditionally. The official League documents show they ranked Cotsworth's 13-month calendar as the absolute best proposal. It was mathematically superior. A corporate giant had already proven it worked. This should have changed everything. It was one vote away from becoming the global standard for the entire human race. But instead, silence. And that silence has lasted until today.
I tried to tell myself that people just didn't want to change their habits. I wanted to believe that the world simply preferred the messy, poetic calendar we already had. I tried to chalk it up to a lack of international coordination. But the lobbying records tell a different story. When the League of Nations met to finalize the reform, religious institutions from across the globe organized a massive, unprecedented opposition. They did not argue against the math. They did not argue against the economics. Their argument relied entirely on the year day, that single 365th day that existed outside the 28-day cycle. They argued that a blank day would disrupt the perpetual, unbroken 7-day cycle of the Sabbath. For the sake of preserving a specific sequence of religious days, a sequence that had already been altered dozens of times in human history, the most logical measurement of time ever devised was killed. No international body has seriously considered calendar reform since. It was buried in a committee. Because calendars have often been changed for political or institutional reasons. Time is not a neutral measurement. It is the ultimate architecture of human behavior. If you control the days, you control the culture. Just look at what happened during the French Revolution. In 1793, the new government didn't just change the names of the months to Thermidor and Brumaire. They instituted a 10-day week. Why? Because if there are 10 days in a week, there is no Sunday. And if there is no Sunday, the church loses its congregation. Workers now had to toil for 9 days before getting a single day of rest instead of 6. The government deliberately altered the rhythm of exhaustion to break the influence of the church. You cannot gather if you do not know what day it is. Or look at the Soviet Union. In 1929, Joseph Stalin's government introduced the continuous working week. They abolished the 7-day week entirely and replaced it with a 5-day week. Every worker was assigned a color: yellow, pink, red, purple, or green. Your color determined your day off. The psychological impact of this was devastating. Husbands and wives were deliberately given different colors. You stood on the assembly line on your pink day while your spouse was at home. When you finally had your day off, your spouse was at the factory. You could not see your family. You could not gather with your friends. The state destroyed the shared rhythm of society so that the individual was completely isolated, connected only to the machinery of the state. This is the very real power of a calendar. The edits never stop. Let's look at the timeline of how we got here. It is a straight line of institutional intervention. In 1582, Pope Gregory erases 10 full days overnight. People went to bed on Thursday, October 4th, and woke up on Friday the 15th. Contracts were broken. 10 days of human life simply deleted from the ledger by a signature in Rome. In 1793, France edits the week to isolate the church. In 1929, Stalin edits the week to isolate the individual. And in 1931, the League of Nations kills the final attempt to return humanity to 13 equal logical months. If you fly into Addis Ababa, Ethiopia today, your phone will automatically adjust its date. You will suddenly be 7 or 8 years in the past, not because Ethiopia miscounted, but because they refused to adopt the Roman edit. Ethiopia still uses a 13-month calendar right now, 12 months of 30 days, plus a 13th month of 5 or 6 days. Over 120 million people live on it. It works. It has worked for centuries. They were never colonized into the Gregorian system. In a museum in Brussels, there is a baboon fibula called the Ishango bone. It was discovered in Central Africa and dates back 20,000 years. The notches carved into it perfectly track 6 months of lunar cycles. It is the first evidence of humans not just experiencing time, but recording it. 20,000 years ago, humanity knew exactly how to measure time by looking at the sky. They understood the 13 cycles. The math was clean. It was carved into our history before the first city was ever built. But we abandoned that math. If you think this is the only time history has been rewritten to hide reality, you are mistaken. Across the Atlantic, another event literally blotted out the sun for 18 months. A demographic collapse so massive it changed the trajectory of human civilization. And instead of investigating it, historians chose to classify the survivors as poets simply to ignore the truth. They reclassified a cataclysm as a myth. We will come back to that. Sol disappeared from Kodak's pocket planners in 1989, quietly, without public explanation. They just stopped printing them. Today, no government or international organization seriously considers calendar reform, not because it is impossible, but because time is too valuable a tool of control to surrender to mathematics. Look at the date on your phone. That number feels permanent, but it isn't. It is the result of centuries of edits, decisions, and power struggles, because time itself is not just measured, it is governed.